Israel will be out of interceptors in 10 to 12 days. So after that, they can't intercept any. There obviously quite a few are getting through now, but they won't be able to intercept any. And I think, yeah, maybe it was the Wall Street Journal that has a story on the Arrow interceptors in particular. What Israel has is they have, let's say, 3-4 different systems to protect themselves from missile and rocket attacks. And the highest level, the one is the Arrow 3 that actually extends into the beyond the atmosphere. And it's for, some of these ballistic missiles that Iran is sending, they do go out of the atmosphere, like the THAAD missiles that the U.S. has supplied Israel. So the Arrow 3 deals with that. And then there's the Arrow 2, which is slightly within the atmosphere, but still a high altitude. Under that is the David Sling. And then at the very bottom is the Iron Dome. The Iron Dome is actually not relevant to what's going on here at all, because that's actually just for very primitive, Katyusha rockets and low technology missiles fired from Lebanon or from Gaza. It's mainly the Arrow 3s, and apparently those are very expensive interceptors, and the Israelis, according to the Wall Street Journal, are facing a critical shortage of them. And the thing is, these are irreplaceable, basically. They're very difficult to manufacture. They're very expensive. The THAADs cost, I hear, $12 million a piece.
Per missile?
Yeah.
And are we shooting two at once? Or
yeah, usually. Well, actually, there was recently, the Iranians have fired some of their more advanced missiles recently. There was one, I think it's called the Fatah 1. And it's one that they hadn't fired, a hypersonic. I don't know if it's true hypersonic or we'll call it quasi-hypersonic. There's a debate over that. But this is according to the Middle East Spectator. I haven't seen it anywhere else, but according to the Middle East Spectator, they said that, they had provided the video footage. 12 interceptors were fired at this, and none of them hit the target. The Fatah 1 actually struck Israel. 12. So if you're talking about, these are interceptors. If you're talking about THAAD, that's $12 million a piece. If you're talking about Arrow, I don't know how many it is, but it's millions of dollars a piece. And apparently one of these Fatah 1s, that's the most expensive, or one of the most expensive that Iran has, costs $200,000 a piece. So again, in the long run, if Iran can retain its launch capability, you just see that the long run favors Iran.
Yeah, I mean, when you say that they'll run out of interceptors in 10 to 12 days, you said Israel will, but does that mean the collective West is? Because like we said before, it's not just Israel doing it. We're talking about the THAAD system. Right. That's the U.S. system. 12 million a pop for that. The Patriot interceptors are like 2-3 million a pop. And who knows how many THAADs we make? I know we only make 550 Patriot missiles.
Right. THAADs, it's about 60 a year.
Yes. Okay.
Right.
And
then there's the SM3s, and that's about the same. I had heard actually 30 a year for SM3s, but the more recent figures show about 60 a year. And those are the ones that are fired from the ships, and they're part of this defensive system. I talked about the Israeli system, the different layers, but remember, Israel's also being protected by the U.S., both by, ship launch missiles, by the ground launch THAADs, the Patriots. The Patriots apparently haven't done anything because the Israelis seem to regard them as junk. And then, but then also air launch missiles by the U.S. Air Force, the French, fired from, French jets, British jets, Jordanian jets, they're all part of it. And still these missiles are getting through. And then the thing is, we've talked again about the shortage of interceptors within Israel, but it is a worldwide shortage. We've talked about that in relation to Ukraine. And the stockpiles have been depleted severely in Europe, in the US. The production capacity is very limited. So this is a war that the whole, even if the West rallies behind Israel, as they are, they're supplying Israel with all kinds of things, their ability to support Israel is limited. It clearly is. We've seen that in Ukraine, and now it'll become even more obvious here in Israel. And by the way, the diversion of all these air defense assets from Ukraine to Israel is already causing a real crisis within Ukraine.
I think you give Israel and the United States too much credit when it comes to, like, is there a chance that they could come out? Could they enact regime
Yeah,
change, or again they all? I just, when you tell me this though,
yeah,
it's just I don't care how many tanks that the United States has. I don't care how many aircraft carriers that they have. I don't care how much money we spend on our military. At the end of the day, in modern warfare, what we need to look at are missiles and air defense, drone. We need to look at production capacity. And the fact that this is something that we talked about before is that I was thinking that maybe one thing that could potentially save us from the death throes of U.S. Primacy, the death throes as it's going out, it's going to start flailing around, is that it's going to try to turn on its big war machine, and we're going to find out it's just going to sputter and die. And
yeah.
that might be really what happens. Okay, yeah, we're moving a lot of big assets, but does that really matter? Like, if aircraft carriers in the Persian Gulf, well, if you use them, we know that Iran can sink them. They have ship-killing missiles from the Chinese that are provided there. And what we've seen from Ukraine, what we've learned is that it's a war of attrition. We saw what happened with the Houthis, how many billions of dollars the United States spent, and they couldn't even affect any real change in a third world country, the poorest country in the Arab world. So it's so ludicrous. And then I just see the war propaganda just pumping out so much. And it scares me because I see it and it looks like it's winning. And I'm happy to see this pushback. And thank you to everybody that likes all of those little comments to go against those warmongers, those Zionists that are trying to draw us into this awful war. We need to speak out and support all those people. Jackson Hinkle is ratioing all of these Zionist warmongers, and I love to see it. I think we really need to keep that up. But I just don't. I think even if we did get dragged in and the warmongers get their way, there's just these hard realities that we will try. We may try. Maybe we're able to do some aerial bombardments. I mean, basically, that's all I think the U.S. can do. If it can't do that, what are you going to do? A ground invasion? No
Right,
way. It's
right.
not
We're
going to
not going to
happen.
do it. Yeah, I don't see that happening. Again, Trump may be talked into this by people who are telling them this will be short and sweet. We'll send in a few B-2s, they'll take them out, and then they'll go home, and that's it. Everybody will be happy. Everybody loves a short and sweet air war. You'll be a hero. But that's not the way it's going to be. Even if it is a relatively successful raid and no B-2s are shot down, Iran can retaliate, and they can retaliate very easily. We know that. There are all those very vulnerable targets within the region, within easy reach of even short range and mid range Iranian missiles that they haven't even used yet. It would be an air war. That's all we could do. There's not going to be a ground invasion. Now, again, we could cause a lot of misery and death in Iran. But it's, I think, as I said in a previous program, it's close to impossible to really win an air war. It's just that you really need to have forces on the ground. Now, I can think of one air war that we won, and you could say was in Serbia. But, Serbia is a much smaller country, and it was going against all of NATO. It was, even there, it took 2 months, and then they surrendered. But it's, for Serbia, it also wasn't quite the kind of the existential struggle that it is for Iran. So, I guess you could look at Serbia, even so, and say, well, maybe we could force a surrender. Maybe we could cause. I don't see these things, but I just have to admit that there's always a possibility. Sometimes we can become so fixated on our own hopes, and we can become so dismissive of what the other side says that we don't really entertain the possibility that the other side could win. I don't think they can win, but they're, again, we were surprised by that, of course, by that surprise attack and the effectiveness of it. And maybe there are other tricks up their sleeves. Maybe there are weaknesses in the Iranian society that we're not aware of. But Yeah, in general, I agree that this is not going to succeed. It could just again cause a lot of misery and death, but Iran will be still standing. And if finally the U.S. gives up, it's going to be hard to. But I think in the end, it will have to give up. You know, even in spite of its entanglement with Israel, it'll just have to give up. It will. You say, okay, yeah, Iran really suffered, but what did you achieve? The U.S. What did you achieve, Israel? What have you done? What is it? As the whole world will see that that these aggressors, um, succeeded in causing a lot of misery and death, but that's about it.
Right. Would you say it's fair to say that what has been set in motion right now will ultimately lead to the collapse of Israel and the empire? Right. That is what we're looking at. That is the significance. There's no putting that genie back in the bottle now. Right. Israel
Yeah,
can't stop now. We went through and just said that as this progresses, is the United States cannot let Israel collapse. Donald Trump won't let that happen. The Zionist machine will do everything in its power to push for this, and it seems like it just can't happen, right? So
yeah.
this is happening. This is
Well,
explain what's
yeah,
happening.
yeah, yeah.
What's going on?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I don't know that. I don't think we're going to see, unfortunately, the true collapse of the American empire, like when this is all over. I may be wrong. It depends on how bad this gets and how long it goes. But there's no question that it's again accelerated all the trends that we've been talking about, and it's done quite a bit to shine a light on this very um, dark relationship, let's say, between the U.S. and Israel. It's really it's there has been an increasing awareness of our entanglement, let's say, with Israel over the past, ever since, in particular, ever since October 7th. But this is just only going to accelerate that. Um, Now, all the people that sponsored this war and supported it, they're not going to disappear overnight. They're still going to be there. But yeah, I think they're going to be weakened. I mean, this would be a huge failure. This will be a huge failure for Israel if as I expect, they do not succeed in their objectives. Iran is still standing when it's all over, and it will be it will be sort of um, an emperor has no clothes moment. There has been this myth of Israeli invincibility, and it's something that has been really important to the identity of Israel, both within Israel and back here in the U.S. I think that myth really took off in 1967 with the Six-Day War, and it's been building up ever since. And this could be the end of that myth. It wouldn't be the end of Zionism, the end of Israel, but it would be one of the pillars that has been supporting Israel and Zionism will collapse, I believe, when this is all over.
Yeah, it's hard for me to see Israel still standing as it is because I mean it's still engaged in this genocide in Gaza. It still holds parts of Syria. It holds parts of Lebanon. Once as it gets weakened and it gets damaged more and more, I don't see them being able to continue what they're doing. And you said, for example, that Iran would stop firing missiles into Israel if Israel stopped its attacks as well. Um, I, do you think that's really true that Iran that they could just stop at this point because we're seeing Israel just still slaughter the people in Gaza?
Yeah.
I think there is so much almost like a cathartic feeling when Iran finally struck back. Everybody was just like, yes, finally, Israel's getting a taste of its own medicine for everything they've done to the Palestinians, to Gaza, and I think it'll just I think there's just so much public support behind what Iran's doing around the world that they should only stop to say like you have to stop killing the people in Gaza. I mean that's what this really comes back to. This is what kicked everything off to begin with,
Mm-hmm.
and if we don't address that root problem, then it's going to continue, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think it has to be pointed out, again, that we're all focused on what's happening in Tehran and in Tel Aviv right now for obvious reasons, for very good reasons. But the carnage in Gaza has not slowed down. It was just within the last 24 hours that 59 civilians were massacred. Hungry civilians that were hoping to get some sort of food were massacred while waiting for that food shipment to arrive. And the IDF hasn't even, pretended like, oh, they were Hamas or anything. They just say that, well, they were in the wrong place. Like we had zoned that for combat and they were supposed to be over here. So we fired our tank shells at them and killed 59 of them, injured hundreds of them. This is something that, again, this would be big news, but because it's all overshadowed, it has to be remembered that it continues. The carnage continues. The starvation continues. So, yeah, I mean, it just seems to me that there has to be some sort of breaking point where the world, it just says enough is enough. It hasn't happened so far. I mean, it's amazing that again, we have basically just the Houthis and then indirectly the Iranians acting against it, really opposing Israel. But the rest of the world it hasn't. There are the countries that really can do something about it. And the number one country, of course, is the U.S. And but then following the U.S., we'll just say is the Western Europe collectively, because they do supply a lot of arms to Israel, but not nearly as much as the U.S. And the U.S., if the U.S. said no, I think Europe would say no. The U.S. could again end this, could end the Iran war, it could end, the attack on Gaza, the genocide in Gaza. It could end it almost immediately. So this is the one country that could make a difference. But then there are other countries just around Israel, like Turkey, that can make a real difference. And Turkey is supposed to be a brother nation, right? It's supposed to be a Muslim nation. Why aren't they? They're Sunni Muslim, and so are the Gazans. They're Sunni Muslims by and large. And why aren't they supporting them? They haven't. Now, other countries are far away. I say, well, maybe either the Russians should do more or the Chinese should do more. Yeah, there's a problem though with, they have that military power, but they can't, if they intervene directly, then you have a risk of World War III. And that's the problem that we're looking at too in the case of Iran. Now, but I think there's no question that both the Russians and the Chinese are going to provide very vital support to Iran. And then it also has to be remembered that Iran hasn't asked for any other country to intervene on their behalf. But we know that Iran has been meeting with both Russian and Chinese representatives, high-level meetings. We're talking about foreign ministers and heads of state. And I'm sure they always understood that this could happen, and they made arrangements. Now we're already seeing on the Chinese side that deliveries are being made. There are reports of military transport aircraft flying into Tehran from China. And then it should also be remembered that there is now a rail link between China and Iran that actually went into operation just a couple of weeks ago. But that's a way that China can support Iran, very directly. We've gone away from the, I know the original question was about the genocide. The countries that can make a difference aren't doing it. Other countries, it's more difficult for them to do something, especially in the case of, Gaza and Palestine in general. But when it comes to Iran, we have two superpowers, Russia and China, that can make a difference. And, even though they will not intervene directly, they're not going to send their own, pilots and aircraft there. I don't see that happening unless who knows, this gets just too crazy. They can do a lot to keep Iran in the fight and keep them standing.
Yeah, I mean, you say that Russia and China, they don't want to intervene around militarily, understand causing greater conflict. But the problem is that's basically all the United States does, right? We're constantly going around, and it takes people need to stand up to it. I mean, that's what Iran's doing. So I think, don't you think these other powers are realizing that it's time to stand up? I mean, and that
You know,
they are, and that this
right,
is the end. I know they have to calculate it carefully.
right.
Um,
Well, I think they're moving. They are moving in that direction. Let's just put it that way. It wasn't too long ago. Let's say it was actually back. When was the JCPOA finalized? I think it was 2015, and it was around that time that actually UN sanctions were imposed on Iran. Just prior to that, it was part of the whole process. The pressure that the Western powers were putting on Iran to bring him to the negotiating table, and so on and so forth. Well, back then, Russia and China voted to impose those sanctions. Now, it must be pointed out that both of them did quite a bit to water down the sanctions. The U.S. and France and Great Britain, they wanted to impose even harsher sanctions, and the Chinese and the Russians got them to soften them, but still they went along with it. That was back in, I think, approximately 2015. They've gone a long way since then. I think it has to be said, and I think all of us should remember, all of us who believe in BRICS and kind of the resistance to the empire, to the U.S.-led global hegemony, all of us who are part of that, let's say, movement or community. I think we all have to really show our respect to Iran, because Iran was in a sense a pioneer, the first one, and there was a time when Iran stood by itself. It really didn't have any clear friends in the world, powerful friends anyway. And they withstood all these incredible pressures and survived years of sanctions. And the war that was launched against them with U.S. support by Iraq and so on and so forth. And they were still standing after all that time. And it's only just over time that actually, I think, let's say the Iranians and the Russians have long been sympathetic, but they were also, reluctant to offend the West. They still wanted to maintain good relations with the West. So they were careful not to get too close to Iran. That's over. Those days are gone. They're okay. They have made it crystal clear we stand with Iran. It's like they've learned their lesson. It's just that, this power is, it's not about Iran. It is about this mad dream of global hegemony that the West has, and that anybody who risks is going to be attacked in the most vicious and comprehensive way. The Russians have learned it, the Chinese are learning it right now, and they've all kind of come, it's not like they cut their relations with Iran, but it's after suffering their own, being the victim of sanctions and everything else. I think they picked up the phone and called the Iranians and said, "Okay, now we understand. We're with you." So now, things have changed, and to the benefit of Iran, and that may really make the difference. Maybe if Iran's going to survive and and still be standing at the end of this, and I believe they will, they're going to. It'll be in no small part due to the support that they receive from China and Russia, something that they didn't have before.